If I asked you to picture a mindful dad, what comes up? For most fathers, or most people in general, they're thinking of a dad who maybe has all the answers. Maybe you're thinking of a dad who is on a cushion meditating hours a day. Maybe you're thinking about a dad who is calm 100% of the time. Or maybe you're thinking about that guy who is just so sure of himself in his role every single time. And I hate to break it to you, newsflash, but that's not what a mindful father is. You know why? Because those things are extremely, extremely unlikely. What a mindful dad is, though, is someone who is aware that he's unsure, right? He's aware that he's overwhelmed. He's aware of how his body is telling him that he is frustrated and he doesn't have the answers, right? So a mindful father is one who is going to know and accept those very facts because we have worldly responsibilities, right? So we're going to display all of these type of emotions. We're going to be frustrated. We're going to raise our voice. We're going to be overwhelmed. We're going to be uncalm. We're not going to know everything, but we're going to know that and accept that and be aware once that is happening. And I think oftentimes we hear the word mindfulness and we attribute it to thinking we can be like someone who was a monk or something, or someone that is purposely, for the greater benefit of us all, has decided to leave behind family. They have decided to leave behind worldly responsibilities. Newsflash, me, you, that's not us. We aren't there. We are stuck here in the trenches. We are in the thick of it. And we can use the same practices that the guy who has retired all of his worldly responsibilities, we can use the same exact practices, but we can do them in moderation. We can modify them. We can tailor them to us so that we can have a level of mindfulness and we can show up a lot differently than we were in the past. And I think that's what mindful fatherhood is, right? Is to be aware of all your emotions, but it's also you being able to change the way that you perceive what's happening so you can see things for how they truly are as they're happening as a dad, right? Mindfulness is not something that you do. Think of it more as a way of being, right? So, for example, you can be the type of father who, in moments of frustration, with your children, you can be the type of dad to ask questions instead of yelling. Doesn't mean you're never going to yell, but you can, for majority of those moments, be the guy who asks questions. You can be the guy who realizes maybe I'm actually upset about something else and my kid is just bringing out that trigger in me. That's possible. You don't have to always realize that hours or days or weeks after the moment. So being a mindful dad encourages us and gives us the tools and the nervous system for us to actually realize in a lot of these intense moments as a dad that, hold on, something else is actually happening here and I don't need to yell. I don't need to be extra stern because I know the real root of what's happening here, right? So that's a way that you can think about it. And another way you can think about it is, we are listening without preparing a response. For me, I would say that is probably one of the biggest ways I practice mindfulness as a dad is when my kids are talking to me, whether it be a great conversation or whether it be a conversation that we're both like, oh man, this is intense. Whatever the conversation is, I try my hardest. I'm not perfect, but I try to listen like I don't have any idea how to fix it. Right? That's being mindful because we're here now. We're not at the future of me fixing it. We're not at the past of I think this has happened before and I'm pretty sure I know the answer. We're not either of those places. Being mindful is being here in those fatherhood moments. Right now, we're here on whatever date it is, in the car, on the phone, on the FaceTime, at the restaurant, at the park. Wherever the conversation is happening, this is where we are. And I'm going to listen to this conversation. I'm going to listen to what my kid is saying like it's the very first time they're saying it to me, right? I think a lot of the times when you don't hear men speak about this a lot, especially dads speak about this in general. But I think a lot of the times when we hear mindfulness, people go, and I'm guilty of this, I go really deep. I go into shadow work. I go into inner child work. I go into realizing our past traumas. I go into vulnerability and shame, all great things. But sometimes we have to meet people where they are because when I first started out practicing this type of work, all of those terms were very foreign to me, right? I didn't know what people were talking about when they were talking about realizing your shadow. I was like, what is that? What are we, the shadow on the wall? Right? So we got to meet people where they are. And I think this talk is trying to do just that because I wish I had somebody break it down for me as I'm trying to do for you, right? So, something else that I think is extremely important is as a mindful father, you're actually able to connect with your breath in intense situations because as you practice mindfulness, you're actually going to start realizing that your breath is the tell all for all things, right? When your breathing is very rushed, it feels very fast paced, I'm a little overwhelmed, I'm getting triggered, right? So by being able to connect with your breath, you actually are giving yourself the opportunity to course correct as the intense conversation with your kid is happening. So let's talk about some common misconceptions about being a mindful dad and mindfulness in general. The first one is, like I said, you're calm all of the time. Nope, not true. But like I said, it is you being aware of what's happening inside of you. So that's the main difference. It's not that you're never going to be uncalm. It's that you are aware of what's happening inside of you while you're being uncalm. Another thing that is a myth in mindfulness, and this is probably the biggest one, is that you have to meditate for an hour every day. Now, caveat, I personally have a meditation practice of like 45 minutes a day, but I didn't start there, right? And not everybody will end up getting there, right? Because when I sit and I meditate, I'm truly sitting for all beings, right? I've taken the practice to the point where I feel like when I sit and meditate, I'm trying to benefit everybody on the planet Earth, right? That's not everybody's goal, you know? So if you can be mindful when you're drinking tea, you're being mindful, you're slowing down. If you could be mindful when you're telling a bedtime story to your kid, you're being mindful, you're slowing down, you're not rushing through the pages. If you could be mindful when you're making dinner, breakfast, or lunch for your kids, you're slowing down, you're putting love into the actual moment of providing for your children. This can all be mindful. If when you take walks with your kids, if you're not on your phone scrolling, you're being present, right? Remember, I always say presence over perfection. So being mindful is just another way for you to learn how to be present. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on the meditation cushion. I meditate every single day, but it's not something that you have to do. And if you do want to go that route, it doesn't have to be a long, grand scheme of a meditation. I was in Chicago working a couple of weeks ago, and based off of the schedule of the work I was doing, I literally, when I woke up, probably only had 5 to 10 minutes to myself before I had to get going. And I meditated every day in Chicago, but guess what? It wasn't what I was doing when I'm in New Jersey. I didn't have my own fancy cushions with my incense, meditating for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It was me sitting on a hotel bed in silence and meditating for 5 to 10 minutes. And I just think it's important to know that mindfulness can look different. It's not about the activity that you're doing. Think about it as how you are being present during the activity, the type of level of awareness that you're bringing toward the activity. And I'm sure we could think of so many things that we do with our children that we are actually just on autopilot and we're just rushing through it and we're not bringing true presence to that. So think about it that way. Just think about it as it's not necessarily the activity, but it's the level of awareness that I'm bringing to the activity, right? That's something else for you to think about. So, some examples that I'll give you like some fatherhood example, and I'll give you like a real life example of just being mindful. A fatherhood example is oftentimes, you can be in a confrontation with your kid. Doesn't matter how old they are. I remember when my daughter she's 3, but we were at her old daycare and I picked her up from daycare and I said, "Hey, Kenley, put your bag on. It's time to go." And she wanted to go, but she did not want the responsibility of putting her book bag on. And I'm like, put your bag on. It's time to go. And she left the bag on the floor and kind of gave me like a attitude, like a mean face. Now, in that moment, right, being mindful is realizing, like, okay, she's having these emotions. How am I going to react to this? As opposed to just autopilot yelling, put the bag on now. I've seen people, no judgment. I've seen people and, snatch up their kid by the arm and put the bag on now. You know, that's something that people are doing when they're not aware of how they're truly feeling. And in that situation, I could have reacted that way. In the past, I'm sure I probably would have yelled, but I practiced mindfulness in that moment and I moved her to the side. Everybody was there. It was like in the lobby of the daycare. And I said, okay, let's stay here for a little bit longer. I know my daughter, when she gets picked up from daycare, it's the happiest time of her life. She does not want to stay there any longer once she sees her loved ones. So I'm like, yo, we can come over to the side. And I said, hey, let's sit here. And I know you're going through it right now. Something is happening and we could talk about it, but let's just sit here until you're ready to go. That lasted for 4 seconds probably. And she picked up her book bag and walked to the car and we had a conversation about it. You can have, she was like 2 turning 3. So trust me, you can have these kind of conversations with a child who is younger, right? And so I think another thing that you can do outside of being a dad when you're practicing mindfulness is this is like the most lowest hanging fruit in mindful practice is driving. When you have a long commute, when you have a traffic jam, you're already going to be late. Realize in that moment that the commute is the traffic jam. These are all conditions, right? A bunch of things had to happen for this to be taking place right now. That has nothing against you. That's not a personal attack on who you are. And you shouldn't receive it that way. So you're not angry at the moment. It's not like somebody punched you in the face because they don't like you, right? This traffic jam, you are well aware that before you got in the car, the chances of running into a traffic jam was very high. You knew that already. So you're not really mad at the traffic jam itself. So this is the time to connect. This is the time to connect with your breath. This is the time to see how you're clenching on the steering wheel and let go a little bit, you know? Easy, easy. Like driving and being in a commute or a traffic jam, or if somebody like honks the horn at you, I'm talking about it is a mindful playground. Like it's a dojo, you would say. It's the easiest way to practice mindfulness. And yeah, and I just really want to thank everybody who has tuned into the channel, all the dads, all the moms, especially the fathers that are purposely trying to be better for themselves, but also their children. Because man, this is no manual thing. I could sit here for hours and tell you how to practice this and how to do this, but you have to experience it for yourself, right? So I'm just throwing nuggets to help as much as I can, but you have to experience all of these things for yourself and taking the time to listen to my little video. Other than that, I will catch y'all next week. Hopefully, this was beneficial for you and starting to really practice mindfulness as a dad and seeing how it can affect you in many different ways. On the podcast episode of this talk, the link is in the description. I actually go a little deeper into some practices and techniques, and I also do a guided meditation on this topic at the end. So if you're interested in that, I would click on the link in the description for the podcast and also subscribe to the newsletter. You know, all the things I talk about on here, I put it into very practical terms writing because I know some people love to read like myself. So, however you want to digest the information, you can check out the resources in the description. And I will catch y'all next week. I'm sending you nothing but light.